The wind that gusted through the alleys of New Haven, Connecticut, often carried the smell of brine from the nearby Sound, but mostly it carried the sharp, sour tang of the city's waste. For Elias Vance, a boy of 10 whose frame was too thin for his threadbare clothes, this smell was the backdrop to his education. Elias was a dumpster diver, though not for cans or scrap metal. He was hunting for knowledge. His classroom was the row of industrial-sized bins behind the sprawling Yale University campus bookstore. Every Tuesday and Friday, the bookstore staff, weary of handling outdated editions and slightly damaged returns, would toss hundreds of pounds of books, sometimes entire collections, into the cavernous steel containers destined for the landfill. For most of the city's residents, this was trash. For Elias, it was a discarded treasure chest, a silent library waiting to be salvaged. He didn't just rummage, he was systematic. He wore sturdy but too large work gloves, a hand-me-down from a neighbor, and moved with a quiet, efficient grace that belied his age. He'd push aside the loose cardboard and plastic, his eyes scanning for the telltale spine of a hardback or the glossy cover of an academic journal. His greatest finds were the textbooks, calculus, ancient Greek philosophy, quantum physics, dense tomes that smelled of old paper and the promise of a world far beyond the cramped, roach-infested apartment he shared with his perpetually exhausted mother, Sarah. One chilly October afternoon, Elias made a discovery that would change the trajectory of his small, lonely life. The dumpster was unusually full, crammed with boxes marked "Library Overstock, Discard." Wedged beneath a soggy pile of discarded flyers, he saw it, a leather-bound, slightly damaged copy of The Principles of Economics, by Alfred Marshall. It wasn't just any copy, it was an annotated early edition, the kind of book a professor might have used for decades. He lifted it out, brushing off the coffee grounds that clung to the binding. Opening it, he found the margins filled with elegant, sloping handwritten notes in faded blue ink. These weren't corrections, but thoughtful extensions, challenges, and cross-references to other great thinkers. Elias didn't understand the complex equations or the theories of scarcity yet, but he understood the reverence the original owner had for the subject. This was a direct conversation with a brilliant mind, and he was holding the transcript. Elias retreated to his favorite reading spot, a secluded, overgrown patch of grass behind the Sterling Memorial Library, close enough to hear the students chatting but far enough to be invisible. He would spend hours there, painstakingly copying the annotated notes into a small, spiral notebook he'd also found in the trash. The students walking by, privileged, carefree, rushing to seminars, barely noticed the small boy with the intense eyes, clutching his salvaged texts. They saw a kid, they did not see a scholar. Elias's mother, Sarah, worked 2 minimum-wage jobs just to keep their heads above water. She was kind, worried, and deeply pragmatic. She couldn't understand why Elias risked getting sick or caught for a bunch of old paper. "Honey, why don't you look for shoes, or something we can actually use?" she'd pleaded one night, watching him meticulously wipe dust from a Latin dictionary. Elias simply held up the book, running his finger over the embossed title. "This is what I'm going to use, Mom. This is how I get out." The years passed, marked not by birthday parties or summer camps, but by the increasing complexity of the books Elias pulled from the bins. He progressed from high school algebra texts to graduate-level treatises on constitutional law. He taught himself French from a stack of discarded language cassettes and, later, the intricacies of the U.S. financial system from a collection of Yale School of Management case studies. He was a self-taught intellectual prodigy, his brilliance forged in the refuse of the world's elite. His passion was fueled by a silent promise he made every time he pulled a book from the trash: he would not just read the books, he would master them. He would prove that the knowledge meant for the privileged few could be earned by anyone willing to dig for it. By the time he turned 17, Elias was a ghost. He took the GED, General Educational Development, test, scoring in the 99th percentile nationally, and applied for scholarships, not to Yale, which felt like a beautiful, impossible dream, but to the more attainable, respected state universities. His application essay was a simple, stark account of his education: "My classroom was a dumpster. My professors were the men and women whose wisdom lay discarded. I am proof that knowledge, once freed from the constraints of price and prestige, can germinate anywhere." He received a full-ride scholarship to the University of California, Berkeley. The day he left New Haven, Elias took one last walk behind the Yale bookstore. The dumpster was there, cold and empty. He didn't look at it with resentment, but with a profound, quiet gratitude. He owed his life to that steel container. He was leaving the city as Elias Vance, the dumpster kid. He would return as something entirely new. End of Part 1, Introduction. The introduction part has been completed. It has established the main character, Elias Vance, the setting, New Haven, Yale dumpsters, the conflict, poverty versus intellectual ambition, and the inciting moment, finding the annotated economics book. Would you like me to continue the story with Part 2, the development, focusing on Elias's time at Berkeley, his struggle, and his eventual rise as an academic star, the journey from the damp alleys of New Haven to the sun-drenched, bustling campus of the University of California? Berkeley was jarring. When Elias Vance arrived in Berkeley, he felt like an alien who had landed on a planet made entirely of expectation and opportunity. His full-ride scholarship covered tuition, room, and board, but it couldn't cover the cultural gap. His classmates, many of whom came from wealthy, educated families, spoke a different language, one of summer internships, European gap years, and parental contacts. Elias spoke the language of scarcity. While other freshmen worried about parties and elective courses, Elias worried about maximizing every single dollar. He took on a demanding work-study job in the campus archives, cataloging ancient texts. It was lonely, dusty work, but it paid a small stipend, and, more importantly, it gave him access to even more books, a quiet sanctuary away from the social pressures of the dorms. Academically, Elias was a phenomenon. He chose economics as his major, driven by that foundational, annotated textbook he had salvaged. His years of self-study had given him an almost frightening depth of understanding. He wasn't just learning concepts, he was reviewing them, arguing with them, and often finding their subtle flaws. In his junior year, he enrolled in a notoriously difficult seminar, Advanced Economic Theory, taught by the formidable Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Reed was a Nobel laureate contender, known for her brutal grading and her total lack of tolerance for mediocrity. During a discussion on income inequality, a topic Elias understood viscerally, he quietly challenged a core assumption in the assigned reading, citing counter-arguments from 3 different historical economists, all of whom he had first encountered in those discarded books behind Yale. Dr. Reed, a woman who rarely showed surprise, slowly adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice sharp, "those are obscure references for a third-year undergraduate. Where did you acquire such a diverse background in pre-war economic thought?" Elias felt the familiar heat of embarrassment, quickly followed by a surge of defiant pride. He could have lied, but he chose truth. "Dr. Reed," he stated simply, "most of my core education came from books discarded by the Yale bookstore and retrieved from their dumpsters. I read them, and I annotated them myself." The classroom went silent. Some students snickered, others looked genuinely shocked. Dr. Reed simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, she did something unexpected. She smiled, a rare, genuine expression of respect. "Well, Mr. Vance," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "It appears the opportunity cost of wealth for you was the freedom to pursue pure, unadulterated knowledge. And I must say, you have made the far superior investment. See me after class." From that day on, Dr. Reed became Elias's fierce advocate. She saw his brilliance, recognizing the rare combination of abstract theoretical mastery and real-world understanding that his impoverished background had inadvertently provided. She pushed him relentlessly, inviting him to join her research team, where he quickly proved his ability to solve complex models that had stumped her graduate students. His focus became behavioral economics, studying the psychological biases that influence financial decision-making, particularly among low-income households, a subject he approached with the ethical weight of personal experience. The years at Berkeley were a blur of work, study, and relentless progress. He graduated summa cum laude, delivering the commencement address, a moving speech where he spoke not of his poverty, but of the democratization of information and the power of a single, unwanted book. His academic journey did not stop there. He was immediately accepted into the highly competitive PhD program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, again on a full scholarship. At MIT, he flourished under the intense environment, his ability to absorb and synthesize vast amounts of information setting him apart. His doctoral thesis, The Paradox of Scarcity. How Cognitive Load Impedes Rational Financial Planning, was a groundbreaking work that merged economics and neuroscience. It was not just brilliant theory, it was a deeply compassionate call for policy changes to help those struggling with financial stress, a direct reflection of his mother's daily struggles. By his mid-20s, Dr. Elias Vance was no longer the boy who smelled of dumpster dust. He was a rising star in his field, published in top academic journals, and sought after by think tanks and universities. He had traded his oversized gloves for bespoke suits, and the smell of refuse for the crisp scent of new paper and leather-bound reports. The academic world was his to choose. He fielded offers from Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Chicago, but there was only one place he truly considered. 15 years after he had last climbed over the edge of a steel bin, Dr. Elias Vance accepted a tenure-track position as an assistant professor of economics at Yale University. He was coming home. The office assigned to Professor Elias Vance was located on the 4th floor of the Sterling Memorial Library's annex, a space with high vaulted windows overlooking the very courtyard where, 15 years earlier, he had sat huddled, reading his salvaged textbooks. The room was grand, lined with new, untouched shelves, a stark contrast to the rough steel of his former classroom. He unpacked his few personal items, his PhD diploma, a framed photo of his smiling mother, Sarah, now finally retired and living comfortably thanks to his success, and, most importantly, the slightly worn, leather-bound copy of The Principles of Economics, the book that had started it all. He placed the book on his desk, the faded blue annotations by an unknown former professor, now serving as a permanent anchor to his past. Elias's first semester at Yale was a triumph. His course, Behavioral Economics and Poverty Policy, quickly became one of the most sought-after seminars. He didn't just teach theory, he taught lived experience, translating complex models of utility maximization and risk assessment into the daily choices faced by a single parent struggling to pay rent in New Haven. He was rigorous, compassionate, and utterly authentic. He became known on campus not only for his groundbreaking research but for his unusual habit, the Tuesday afternoon walk. Every Tuesday at 4 p.m., Elias would leave his distinguished office, walk through the opulent campus gates, and head 3 blocks down to the row of businesses adjacent to the main bookstore. He would stop at the same row of dumpsters. He didn't climb in. Instead, he simply observed. One blustery November afternoon, he saw a small figure perched on the edge of the large, open dumpster behind the bookstore, a girl, perhaps 14, bundled in a thick, borrowed coat, her gloved hands sifting through a box of chemistry texts. She moved with the same focused, intense energy Elias remembered in himself. He stopped 10 feet away, silent. He watched as she pulled out a pristine copy of Organic Chemistry, wiping the residue from the cover with the sleeve of her coat before tucking it carefully into an old backpack. The girl, whose name was Maya, finally looked up, her eyes wide with fear and suspicion. She expected to be yelled at, dismissed, or perhaps threatened with a call to campus security. Elias did not move. He simply reached into his own bag and pulled out the old, annotated economics book. "That's a good find," he said, his voice soft, almost a conspiratorial whisper. "Organic chemistry is tough. You'll need a solid base in physical chemistry first, especially the sections on thermodynamics. You should check the bins behind the law school on Thursdays. They sometimes discard old physics journals." Maya stared, speechless. He looked like the professors she saw gliding across campus, impossibly neat, impossibly successful, yet he was talking to her, the dumpster kid, with the respect of a colleague. I only have a little bit of time," she stammered, clutching the book tighter. "I have to get home before my shift starts." Elias smiled, a genuine, easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I understand. My name is Elias Vance. I teach economics here at Yale." He nodded towards the dumpster. "This used to be my primary resource center." He handed her a business card. It was simple, Dr. Elias Vance, Assistant Professor, Yale University. On the back, he had scribbled a personal note: "Your first lecture is Tuesday at 5 p.m. New Haven Public Library, Stetson Branch. We start with the principles of scarcity. Don't be late. And please, leave the dumpster diving to the professionals." Elias knew his personal success wasn't the end of his story, it was merely the seed for the next. The system that had discarded him was too powerful for one person to change, but the knowledge that saved him could be freely shared. He partnered with the New Haven Free Public Library to launch a program he called the Unwanted Library Project. It was a free, non-credit, rigorous academic program for ambitious, low-income New Haven high school students, offering classes taught by him and his graduate students on advanced concepts in math, science, and humanities. His lectures weren't held in Yale's grand lecture halls but in the public library's modest community rooms, bringing the world-class education directly to the community that had raised him. He recruited Maya, and many other students like her, giving them structure, mentorship, and access to actual, clean, new books. 15 years after finding a discarded life, Elias Vance had returned to the institution that had unintentionally taught him, not to merely be accepted, but to become an agent of change. His journey proved the central tenet of his life, that true brilliance can emerge from any corner, and that the value of knowledge is not determined by the price tag, but by the hunger of the reader who holds it. The boy who read the dumpsters was now the professor who filled the libraries, ensuring that no other aspiring scholar would have to rely on the city's refuse to build a future. The wind still swept through the New Haven alleys, sometimes carrying the scent of trash, but now, thanks to Professor Vance, it also carried the faint, hopeful scent of new paper and untold possibilities.